Thank you for joining us today for a very special webinar with Elliott Seif about teaching for lifelong learning. I'm Lauren Mitchell, editor at Hawker Brownlow Education, which is based in Naarm, Melbourne. I'm joining you today from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. In the spirit of reconciliation, Hawker Brownlow Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. For those who aren't familiar with Hawker Brownlow Education, we empower F to 12 teachers and educational professionals with the tools, skills, and also webinars to help improve classroom performance and to raise student achievement. I've got a couple of tips for today's presentation. I'll be moderating and I've just got to run through a couple of items. Please use your chat box for any technical questions and send them to the user Hawker Brownlow Education. That'll be me. You'll be placed on mute during the webinar, but please feel free to enter questions into the chat box. Just be sure to choose all attendees and panelists just so that we can all see your insightful questions. I will ask them at the very end. And so don't be shy. Throw any queries, any discussion points that you'd like to share in there. We don't want to miss you. Now, if you need to get in touch with us after today, you can reach us via email at info@hbe.com.au. You can also give us a follow on all the usual places on social media. You can find past webinars and other video resources just like this session on our YouTube channel at Hawker Brownlow Ed. Now, let me introduce you to Elliott Seif. Dr. Elliott Seif is an educational presenter, consultant, and author. He has written many articles and several books, the most recent being Teaching for Lifelong Learning, How to Prepare Students for a Changing World. He has previously served as a social studies teacher, a professor of education, and a director of curriculum and instruction services. Dr. Seif earned a Master of Education from Harvard and a doctorate in curriculum research and development from Washington University. Elliott, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I will hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me get my slides up and we will get started here. Okay, so can you all see that, everybody? Okay, good, all right. So I want to thank you for inviting me. Thanks to Hawker Brownlow for inviting me today to share my thoughts and ideas with you. Good morning, everyone. Here I am all the way from Philadelphia. It's pretty amazing that I'm here in Philadelphia at 5 o'clock in the evening and you're there at 8 o'clock in the morning and we can converse as if we're sitting right next to each other. It's a pretty amazing thing that we're being able to do this. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going to happen in the next hour. I want to briefly visit 3 questions with you, 2 of which will be briefer than the last one, which I think is the more practical part of this session. The first one is, why do we need to prepare students for a lifetime of learning? That will be a brief introduction. And then, what will students need to be prepared for the world they'll live in for a lifetime of learning? What knowledge, what skills, what else? And then the final question is, how do we integrate, how do we organize all of that into a teaching strategy, a structure for teaching that really will prepare students for a lifetime of learning? And might I add also, I think also prepare them for greater success in the work that they do with you. So those are the 3 questions we're going to explore. My goal is to introduce you and familiarize you with a way to organize instruction that both better prepares students for a lifetime of learning and growth, and also, as I said earlier, is a good way of organizing teaching for student success. So I think it has both aspects of this work together. We obviously have a relatively short period of time for this, so I hope that what we do today will pique your interest in learning more about this kind of work and start you to think about it, but also to give you some idea about how you can incorporate many of the ideas in this presentation into both your classrooms and in your schools, depending on your circumstance and situation, if you're a teacher, if you're an administrator, and so on. I know that you all have been provided with a handout. It's a pretty extensive handout, although most of it is relatively short pieces, but there's one part where I'm going to ask you to look at a way to organize instruction and pick one way to do it. And so there's a lot in the handout that you will be exploring along the way. So as we go through this, follow along, take notes, circle and mark what's important to you, and use this handout for exercises and reflections. So I hope you have it, and I hope that you'll be able to use it as we move through this presentation. As was said earlier, if you have any questions as we go through this, put them in the chat box, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end where we will discuss as many of them as we can, and of course, given the time constraints. But we will try to get to them all, as many as we can. So let's start our journey with question number 1. Why do we need to prepare students for a lifetime of learning? That's the handout 1, page 1 of your handout. So I'd like to ask you to, briefly, to get involved with me in this question, to think about the world as we know it today, the difficult world as we know it today, the challenging world as we know it today, with a pandemic, with a Zoom like the one we are on today that allows us to talk without being in person, and with all the vaccines that now are contributing to overcoming this terrible time that we're living through. And I know Australia is facing it, America's facing it, the world is facing it. So what words or phrases that come to mind to you when you see these 3 words, and what do these words represent or tell you about the world we live in today, the world students will live in? Just quickly jot down a few of your words or phrases that you think represent the kind of world we're living in today and that our students will live in the future. Now, unfortunately, I can't see you, so I can't really tell when you have written these down. I'm assuming that it'll just take you a minute or so to jot down a few of the words. But I want to share with you what my words are and give you a chance to compare them. So my 3 words or phrases that I think represent what these words symbolize, what pandemic, Zoom, and vaccine symbolize, is that we're living in a world of rapid change. We're living in a world of uncertainty. We really don't know what's going to happen in the future. And we're also living in a world of significant challenges. Of course, the pandemic and vaccines and overcoming the pandemic is one of the most significant. But of course, there are others as well. So compare these ideas to your ideas. I hope they're similar, the same. You may have some others, some additional ones that you've jotted down, and that's great. That's great. I want to share with you a couple of other words and phrases. These are a little more specific that I think our students will be facing in the world that they will live in when they graduate. They live in a world of knowledge explosion. They have an amazing number of ways to easily communicate with each other. They will be facing a lot of career changes and challenges. There's search engines and online access to information, videos, games that never before existed, science and technology advances, robotics, artificial intelligence, climate changes, multiple news sources, all of these things create a world which represents what I mentioned earlier, a world of rapid change, uncertainty, and significant challenges. Our students will face challenges in three areas, I think. They will face personal life issues, health and well-being, what to do with their time, how to keep up with technology, and so on. They're going to face professional issues, the kind of career they want to get into. They'll most probably be in a world of job shifts and job changes many times in their lifetime. They'll be looking at new knowledge, and they will have to themselves be skill trained many, many times because of the changing technology and other skill areas that are going to be changing. And then in the public and civic arena, the idea of getting good information, of developing their own perspectives of who to support, political parties to support, who to vote for, what kind of activism to do. All of these are the kinds of things that they will be facing. So they will be facing a world of continual challenges in many different areas. And if you think about it, they will be with you in schools roughly for 13 years of schooling. But beyond that, when they graduate, even if they go to college, even if they go to a university, they probably will have 60 or more years beyond of learning, growth, and problem solving. So we have to prepare them for that kind of world. We have to prepare them for the world of change, for uncertainty, and the fact that they will, over the years after they leave us, be in a world where learning, growth, and problem solving will be part of their everyday lives. So given that world, what will they need? What will they need from us to be prepared for this changing, uncertain world, for a lifetime of learning? What knowledge, what skills, what else will they need from us? Well, I want to propose to you four goals that I think we should be cognizant of as teachers and as educators and administrators, that we need to be sure that we prepare students when they graduate that they have developed. One is, I think they need to develop a growth mindset. They need to maintain or build their curiosity and their interest in learning. They need to have a willingness and desire to deal with personal, professional, and public challenges. They need to know that their efforts will make a difference in their learning, in their improvement, and their growth. And I think, unfortunately, in many classrooms and schools, this, at least in the United States, this is no longer a really important goal for us, that we don't do enough to help assure that kids are curious and interested in learning and are willing and desirous of dealing with issues. One way that we can help students to do this is by trying to build the work that we do around what we call, a number of us here in the States call, compelling essential questions. That we find questions that engage kids in wanting to find out more about the topic that they're studying. And these are some examples of questions that I've gleaned from many different teachers, actually, who have worked on this to develop essential questions and to use those questions to stimulate interest and curiosity and learning. So you can look at some of these. They're written down for you in the handout. You don't have to write them all down, but you can see that these and other questions like this are the kind of questions that enable students to really get involved and interested in learning. A second part of growth mindset is the use of formative assessments, rather than the summative assessments, formative assessments that give students feedback and help them improve their work. And with this idea of a growth mindset, students learn to see mistakes as learning opportunities and feedback as a way to help them, rather than that they failed at a task, that they realize that they haven't met expectations yet. This is our job as teachers, is to promote this idea that students can get better at what they do. So Hellerich, for example, suggests that we do a lot of time in the classroom where we give kids a chance to do retakes. The idea to have multiple opportunities for students to rework their assignments, to foster a growth mindset. So they're given many opportunities to rework errors and earn additional credit. And they're given practically, they're given a 2-week window once they've quote unquote completed an assignment to actually improve it and to make it better. So that's just one example of a way in which we can help students build a growth mindset. Actually, two: the essential questions and the idea of more opportunities for formative assessment and feedback, and time for them to develop and improve their work. A second goal is for students to build a strong and meaningful foundation of concepts, big ideas, and understandings with linked knowledge in all subject areas that help them make sense of the world. Now, in the States, a lot of teachers here promote the idea of teaching facts. And I'm suggesting here that understandings or concepts that give students some more meaningful understanding of the world are the way we should be thinking about what we should be teaching them. So here's, again, some examples. It's also in your handout of what are some of the things that we might want students to understand by the time they graduate. We might want them to understand the scientific method and science investigation. The difference between fact and fiction. In today's world, that's a really important distinction to make. In science, the biological, chemical, and physical nature of the natural world. Obviously, these are pretty general: historical trends and challenges, art and music. By the time they graduate, they ought to have this background knowledge and concepts that enlarge their view and understanding of the world around them and allow them to see things in more complex ways than they might do before they are educated with you. Third is the ability to use a complex set of skills. And the four that I'm going to describe to you here are to be an active researcher, to think critically and creatively, to be a good communicator, and to collaborate well with others. There are others in my book, but those are four that I want to stress for now. So to be an active researcher means that rather than just use a textbook and read the textbook and then answer questions, they see the textbook and you see a textbook as a resource, only one resource, and that there are lots of ways in which students can, quote unquote, research, find information in order to read, study, digest, evaluate, and synthesize information and ideas. So the idea is that we want to give kids practical opportunity, more practical opportunity to learn how to do that, to learn how to search for, find, read, study, digest, and evaluate a whole variety of information. And that means that the textbook is only one source of information for our students. And we have to help them bring in articles, bring in readings, share with each other, and so on. A second, of course, is that students think critically and logically and use brainstorming and other creative methods to solve problems. I don't think I have to get more deeply into that. I think most of you have a pretty good idea of the kind of thinking that we need to do with our kids. But suffice it to say that we need to bring in lots of opportunities for students to think creatively and critically and logically at a higher level than many times that they do in the classroom. A third is that they be a good communicator, and that means two things. They know how to discuss well, and they know how to write well. So we need to give them lots of opportunities to write stories, essays, research papers, and to also work in discussion-like formats so that they have an opportunity to learn how to talk to each other, to listen to each other, to be coherent, to create coherent arguments with each other, and so on. And then finally, we also want them to be able to apply learning, to become more self-directed, to learn independently. That is, we want them to be able to take what they learned, let's say their research skills, and develop their own research project, or science, to learn how to be a good science investigator, to be able to develop their own science experiments. So we want them to be able to take what they learned and to move that in a direction of being more self-directed, being able to do that on their own. We want to give them the practice to be able to do that, so that when they go out in the world or they go on to college, they're used to learning on their own. They're used to being able to do these things on their own, and they practice that in our classrooms. So that's important too. So those are the 4 goals. Here's some examples of what it means to apply learning and learning independently. You can take a look at those: complete a project from start to finish, conduct research, read, take notes, organize their thoughts on their ideas on their own, and so on. Again, this is in your handout. You don't have to copy it down, but you can see that how these kinds of things are important. So I want to give you a minute now. I've gone quickly through some pretty heady material, and I want to give you a minute to think about this on your own. If you're with somebody else, you can discuss it with them. If you're by yourself, this is something you can do by yourself. But to review handout 1 and reflect on my thoughts and your thoughts about the changing, uncertain, and challenging world we live in today, and what that implies for teaching, and the 4 goals of a lifelong education and some of their implications for teaching and learning. And jot down in the exercise on page 3, jot down what changes are suggested so far that make sense for your own teaching and learning. Jot down your thoughts, and also, if you want, put any questions into the chat box. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we're going to move to how to put this all into some larger perspective as a teaching framework. Okay, I hope you've had some time to do that, and some opportunity to think about this so far, and to think about what the implications are for both the changing world that our students will live in, and the goals that and the implications of those 4 goals for teaching and learning. So let me move on, because I want to take the rest of the time to be a little more practical and down to earth, and to suggest how can we practically organize teaching at every level of education to prepare students for a lifetime of learning. And another way to phrase that is to ask, how can we integrate these four goals: develop a growth mindset, build foundational understandings, learn foundational skills, and apply and deepen learning into your everyday work with your students. And then finally, the same question: how do we organize teaching and learning to better promote student success? Because I think the implications of all this is that we're actually going to be more successful with our kids using this model I'm going to describe to you in a minute. So I want to describe this model, which has four phases: set the stage, build the foundation, apply and deepen learning, and closure. I want to very quickly describe this model by using bike riding, teaching our children how to bike ride as an example. So when we teach our children to bike ride, we start with what I call set the stage. And we determine that our child is ready to do this. We diagnose what skills they already have. And implicit in what we do, we don't actually usually state this question, but the question that we are going to be exploring with our child is, what skills and understandings do I need to learn how to ride a bike? And we're going to introduce to our students at this phase also what they will be learning. We may tell them, we talk about how you're going to have to learn how to balance and brake and steer, and we're going to do that. I'm going to do that with you as your parent in order to get you to ride your bike. So our child comes to us with a lot of curiosity and interest in this. We don't usually have to do much to promote it, but all of these are the kinds of things we do, welcoming that learning and setting the stage for learning. Then we go and we build a foundation for learning. We hold the back of the bike and we help our child practice balancing, practice braking, steering, using the gears. Gradually, we might let go a little bit, pedaling, but all of those things we're going to do with what's called guided practice. We're going to do it in a way that a child feels safe and is able to do it, and is very active in the process. But we're going to guide them and help them in order to build those foundational skills and understandings that will enable them to go to that third stage, which is to apply what they've learned and become an independent bike rider. And so we as many of you might remember, the time when you just let go of that back a part of the bike and let the child ride on their own, and there's this exhilarating feeling that now they are able to ride on their own. And we continue that practice. They learn, they might be there with them, but then they begin to ride on their own, steer. They start riding on different surfaces under different conditions. They learn about the different bikes that are available to them, and they plan to do further learning and riding experiences. So this is that independent learning part where they learn how to do the bike riding independently. And then finally, what I use the term closure. It's probably with bike riding, closure is the wrong word, but it's an extension of bike riding. You ride with others, you ride on your own, you try riding on different surfaces. You refine your braking, your stopping, you might learn with different gears. You might go on bike treks and tours. You might learn to race. You might teach bike riding to somebody else, but this is that extended period where you know how to bike ride and you're just extending the riding and so on. I call it closure because in education, it's more like a time when we close down what we're doing and we start something new, but it is a time to share And you'll see in a few minutes how it relates to education. So those 4 phases, I think, are the building blocks of a strong unit, of a strong, what I call an arc of instruction, in which you create the situation for students to be successful. You set the stage, you build a foundation that enables students to apply and deepen learning, and then you go into a phase where students share their results, share their learning with others, maybe ask more questions and learn some more, and so on. So what does that look like in practice, in educational practice? Well, if you will go to handout 2, go to handout 2, and on my screen I can't see the page number, but you'll see that there are 4 components of the set the stage. There are 4 phases listed in handout 2, and you can look at those. Take a little bit of time to review and become familiar with those 4 components of a 4-phase lifelong learning planning instruction model. Okay, so now what does that look like in practice? So handout 3, pages 5 to 20, there are 6 different models or sample units built around this 4-phase approach. And I'd like you to pick one. There are different levels. There are many at different levels. Pick one that is closest to your level or to your subject area. They're not all going to match your subject area or your level exactly, but pick one to look at as a model to get an idea of what a plan built around these 4 phases might look like. Now, we're going to go through these 1 phase at a time. So right now, all you need to do is to pick one that you're going to use as an example, and take your time and go through this with me. So find a model that best suits your needs right now. Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone is now has a one of these sample units to work from, and what I'd like to do is for you to take a look at the set the stage phase of the one that you've selected and think about these questions. How do the set the stage lessons invite students to learn and provoke curiosity, interest, and inquiry? Introduce and focus learning on a few key understandings, introduce and explain the major tasks and projects to be accomplished, provide a meaningful context for learning, and diagnose and activate prior knowledge. It may not do all of those things. Not every unit does all of those things. These are the things that could be done or can be done during the set stage lessons, depending on what who you are, what you're doing, what grade level, and so on. But just take a look and see, you'll get a feel for how these lessons do these, how the unit that you're looking at and the lessons in the unit set the stage for learning. You know, while you're doing that, if I'm giving you a little extra time, you can look at a second one at the same time. Okay, so let's move on to, whoops. Let's move on to build the foundation phase. So how does the unit you selected, how does it maintain the curiosity and interest in learning? Now, one of the things I like to think happens during the foundation phase is you create opportunities for students to think and act like a researcher. So how is that developed in the unit that you're looking at? How are meaningful concepts and understandings developed? How do students practice key skills? How do they learn more about and begin to develop any key tasks or projects, student work that you're expecting? And how does this particular unit provide opportunities for student improvement through feedback and formative assessment? Remember, that was one of the goals of a growth mindset that we wanted to include in the unit. So briefly scan the foundation set of lessons in the sample unit you selected. And again, if you have time, look at a second one as well. Okay, now move on to the apply and deepen learning phase in the unit that you selected. How does the unit increase student responsibility for learning? How does this phase give students a chance to apply what they've learned to a new task or situation, to independently work on projects, to choose an interest and plan for, develop, or deepen learning in an area of their interest, to develop and improve key tasks and their student work? See how this works. Again, if you get through the one that you've selected, look at a second one and get an idea of how that one works in this phase as well. And then finally, the closure phase. How do the closure lessons in the unit that you selected, how does it do things like enable students to complete a task or project or student work, to demonstrate or explain what they've learned, to make presentations, to share their work with others, to enable students to continue learning, to dig deeper into the topic by learning from others and developing still greater understanding and better use of skills. How does your unit do that? Again, if you have time, take a look at another unit to see how that one does as well. Okay, so now I know I've given you a lot of pause time already, but I want to give you time now to process this way of organizing instruction, to use a handout 2 and your selected sample model, and to reflect on these 4 phases, or as a way of organizing teaching and learning, especially with units. And which parts of this model do you think might be adapted or adopted for instructional planning and teaching? If you're a teacher, you see ways you can immediately begin to incorporate some of this into your own teaching, or is the model itself, the 4 phases, a way that you can think that you can reorganize the way you teach and might make it your teaching more successful? If you have time, you can select the second sample 4-phase model to review. You can do it now if you want to learn more about the 4-phase instructional model and how it's implemented. And later, I'll give you a few possibilities for just redesigning your own units of study so that they are more closer to in proximity to the 4 phases. So anyway, take a few minutes now to just reflect on this and see what makes the most sense for you. Okay, let me, now what I want to do is to uh, give you a little bit of more information about this model, some of the thoughts I have about it. These are all written down on page 21 of the handout. So again, it's not something that you have to copy down. But the lifelong four-phase model, I want to stress, is not only a model to teach kids the kinds of skills and knowledge they need for lifelong learning, but I think it's also a very good model for everyday teaching because it promotes a positive classroom climate. It actively engages students in the learning process. It develops student curiosity, or helps hopefully develops student curiosity about what you're teaching. It focuses learning around key ideas and skills, and it's designed to improve student work and learning, to help students get feedback and to build a strong foundation of understandings and skills that students need in school as well as later in life. So I think of this not only as a model for preparation for the future, but also a model for good teaching. Secondly, I want to stress, I think it's pretty clear that the four-phase model is not a model designed for each lesson. It's designed to teach a number of lessons over time, what I call an arc of learning, such as units of study, reading a book to students over a period of time, dealing with performance tests and projects. So it's a series of lessons, each of which has a different goal in mind. Each phase has a different goal in mind. The introductory phase, the setting the stage phase, is designed to set the stage, building a foundation, build a foundation, and so on. So each phase has a different approach, and you don't combine them into one lesson. Third, I think that this is a useful framework, whether you're teaching in person or teaching online. It tends to activate student learning. The questions allow for discussion online as well as in person. It tends to be more engaging for students. It tends to be more focused on what you think is important for students to learn. So I think it's a really good model, whether you are teaching in person. I know in Australia, you've had all kinds of issues with both teaching in person and online. And I think this is a good model for either one of those. And now some of the follow-up possibilities. Obviously, this is a very brief introduction. These are all on page 23. So if you like the ideas in the lifelong learning four-phase instructional model, you think they can be useful, there's a blog I have at Solution Tree Press, which outlines this model in a way that is readable, and it gives an example, a poetry example, and so on. So you can read more about it there. You can read more about it in my book, Teaching for Lifelong Learning, which also gets much more into the idea of assessment strategies, activities that you can use during the four phases, curriculum, how to focus curriculum around this, and so on. And I've given you the Harker Brownlow website. You have that anyway, where you can buy the book. If you're a teacher, you can try incorporating one or more of these changes into your teaching. And these are some examples of how you might do it. I also have included a four-phase blank template that you can use to design your own unit. And you also can find that same blank template online at the link that I've given you in the handout. And if you are an administrator, you might want to think about this more broadly. Does this make sense to adopt this idea of lifelong learning education for school, for district? What changes would you make? How would you implement the model and other changes to move in this direction? Something to think about. So, and also please feel free to contact me through my website. If you have any follow-up questions, reflections, or comments, there's I have a website, and I have the link to the website that you can use. And let me end with, before questions, let me end with what I think is a useful thing to remember. There's a lot I've given you here, but please remember that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So if you can take a single step in this direction and think about moving in this direction, that's a great thing. I thank you for the opportunity of sharing my ideas, and I appreciate your willingness and to work with me, and I hope this has been a successful workshop and session for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Elliot. I do actually have a couple of questions that have come in through the period. So we've got the first one is on the topic of the growth mindset. Do you have any other tips about positioning mistakes as opportunities to learn rather than as failure, essentially, like an endpoint? So particularly if we're not able to take the extra time needed to offer retakes, are there smaller changes, perhaps some exciting turns of phrase that can be offered to students to build them up rather than let them feel like they've just sort of missed an opportunity and that's over and done?
I think the bigger need is to create a mindset on the part of students that that mistakes are inevitable, and that learning from mistakes is an important part of the learning process. Honestly, I think the best thing that a teacher can do is to demonstrate their own mistakes. So I've seen math teachers who have purposely made an error in math, showing a math problem, and then telling kids, you know, I think I made a mistake here. Can you find it? Can you find the mistake? Or to say, you know, I made a mistake today. I did this and I should have done that. Or to illustrate how a teacher has improved their work over time. So the simplest thing to do is to be a model, for a change. Now, you know, how I don't have any shortcuts for immediately for how you don't try to give feedback to kids and give them a chance or time to do better on something. I don't know what it's like in Australia. I'll give you one example of something I did as a teacher, but I don't know if this is the way things operate in Australia. But we have, in the States, we give a lot of tests which are multiple choice and short answer tests as final exams. And what I used to do as a teacher is I would, after the exams were given and graded, I would spend one period of time with my kids. And I would say to them, look, let's go over the answers. I will give you what I think is the right answer. If you can tell me another answer that you can justify as being the right answer, I will accept it and we'll change the grades on those kids that did well. So we got in the habit of knowing that, first of all, I was vulnerable. I could make an error, and it gave the kids a chance to both to learn what had been done differently, what I had thought was the right answer, so they learned the right answer, but also gave them a chance to correct my mistakes as well. That was a simple thing I did. I thought it worked really well for me. But I don't have a shortcut other than finding ways to build into the time that you have with your kids a chance of giving them a chance to make a correction. Maybe it's just one period where they've done some writing and you give them a chance to rewrite what they've done, and you work with them individually. But other than that, I can't really
No,
I
that
think you
sounds
just
like
have
a
to find the
really
time to do
great
it.
starting point for us. So it sounds like it would really help to demonstrate fallibility on the part of the teacher to begin with, but then also to really work at giving those opportunities to students
Right.
as well. So that sounds really constructive. Thank
That's
you.
exactly right. You said it very well.
There's also another question about do you see the multi-part ethos of the 4 goals as something that individual teachers can work with students to basically instill in them, or is it something that this doesn't need to be an either or question really. It could also be, is it better if you can take a whole school approach, work in teams, kind of overhaul the way that we all think about and approach teaching? How do you see that tension
Right.
between individual practice and whole school
Right.
practice?
I see what you mean. I don't see it as a tension, although I can understand why an individual teacher might then be up against the way in which a school does things differently. But my answer to that is how to for an individual teacher who wants to move in this direction, how can you find a way to do it in a way that it fits in with, as best you can, fits in with the way the rest of the school operates. So it may mean some gradual changes, a few changes at a time. It may mean that you have to talk to people about this exciting workshop that they went through and say, whoa, why don't you take a look at it? It might be helpful. What I usually say now, what I usually tell people is find an ally. That's another way to do it. Instead of thinking whole school and me, are there even just 2 or 3 other people who might be amenable to thinking this way or already leaning in this direction, and that you can start to work with in a small team informally to work with. So that's another way to think about it. It's not whole school me, but a few people that I can work with and talk to about this and see if they're interested in moving in this direction.
And it really does sound like, I mean, I'm not in a classroom, but it sounds like any of these small changes that you can make, drawing from what you talk about in the book and what you've spoken about today, instituting any of those small changes is going to make some sort of difference. And even if you can only do a little bit, it will mean something. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, even if you start instead of, I don't know, again, I don't know in Australia, but in America, we have begin with a lot of behavioral objectives to tell kids what we want to do. Instead of that, start with a question and start asking more questions with the kids. And, that's relatively small change that can make a huge difference. Start with small projects for the kids to do independently to get them to practice working independently.
Thank you. Thank you for your generous answers. We have come up to the 9 o'clock, so we might have to finish up there. Thank you everyone for your questions as well. And thank you for joining us today. I know it's not easy to take time out of your busy schedules, and we really appreciate you being here and sharing this webinar with whoever you think might be interested, whether it's the people you work alongside or perhaps it's somebody in leadership. You can find Teaching for Lifelong Learning, How to Prepare Students for a Changing World, and much, much more at hbe.com.au. We will also send the link out to you via email when that webinar is available. It should be available within the next week or so watch out for that. And finally, a huge thank you to Elliott for joining us today. And thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It means so much. It's fantastic to have you beaming in from the US. It's magic, isn't it?
It is magic.
We wish you all a fantastic end to the week. Thanks again. Hopefully we'll see you again someday.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.